Now, on Tuesday, the Supreme Court handed down a ruling in favor of the Trump administration when it comes to indefinite detention. Now, this is according to a report by the Associated Press. The issue in the case before the justices has to do with the detention of non-citizens who had committed a broad range of crimes that could make them deportable. Now, immigration law says the government must arrest those people when they are released from custody and then hold them while an immigration court decides whether they should be deported. Now, those affected by the law, however, aren't always picked up immediately and are sometimes not detained until years afterwards. And so what happens is that sometimes, or, well, as of recently, during the Trump administration, ICE has been empowered to go and pick up those immigrants. Now, in a case before the Supreme Court, a group of mostly green card holders did argue that unless they're picked up essentially within a day of being released, they should be entitled to a hearing where they can argue that they are not a danger to the community and are not likely to flee. So now, if the judge were to agree, then they would not have to remain in custody while their deportation case moves forward. Now, that's the same hearing rule that applies to other non-citizens the government is trying to deport. However, in this Supreme Court decision, they disagreed with the immigrants' interpretation of that federal law. Looking at statutory provision enacted by Congress in 1996, Justice Samuel Alito wrote that neither the statute's text nor its structure supported the immigrants' argument. And of course, the court's conservative justices ended up siding with the administration. Now, this case is based on a man who was busted twice for marijuana possession. Now, he was released in 2006 last, and 7 years later, ICE had picked him up and put him in indefinite detention until he won his deportation case. Now, apparently, though, if you do your time, you can go back and you can get picked up by ICE after you get released, sometimes years after. Well, now, wait a minute. That's not right. Now, look, does it make sense to put people in detention if you think that they are violent? Yeah, of course. That's for the judge to decide. If you are a danger and if you are a flight risk, let the judge be a judge and say, okay, look, I don't think you're a flight risk, so we don't have a problem. We're going to let your deportation case proceed. Now, as for this original defendant who all they had was marijuana possession, well, that's not a violent crime. That doesn't hurt anybody. And despite doing his prison time for that, which I believe no one should have to, because, again, it is a nonviolent crime, and marijuana should be legal, he then gets imprisoned by ICE for about 7 years while awaiting his deportation hearing. I'm sorry, 7 years later. That is unacceptable. He's not a danger. He's not MS-13. He literally smoked a joint. Yeah, but, Jeff, you don't understand. He's an illegal, which means he broke the law, which means we should lock him away, or lock him up and throw away the key. And so, that's it. That's it. Like, throw him in the dungeon. I think that's kind of gross, really. But see, it's just a pattern that of taking away any legal protections from undocumented immigrants. And that's what the court is trying to do. During the court's last term, Justice Stephen Breyer warned us that this was happening, that they were trying to eliminate constitutional protections from immigrants. Dissenting in a case called Jennings versus Rodriguez, Breyer wrote this, quote, "Whatever the fiction, would the Constitution leave the government free to starve, beat, or lash those held within our boundaries? If not, then whatever the fiction, how can the Constitution authorize the government to imprison arbitrarily those who, whatever we might pretend, are in reality right here in the United States? The answer is that the Constitution does not authorize arbitrary detention. And the reason that it is so, is simple. Freedom from arbitrary detention is as ancient and important a right as any found within the Constitution's boundaries. Literally taking away someone's freedom. Now, what was the one thing that the founders prized above all else? Individual freedom. Locking someone up is against freedom. So, and look, the whole point of that is you can't throw people in prison for no reason. Even if they're undocumented, even if they had done a crime before, but then had served their time. And that's very important. You already served your time, but then later on, the government decides, I don't care, you're here illegally, we're going to throw you in prison while you await your deportation hearing. When in reality, that is not a crime that you should be imprisoned for. But, again, they don't want immigrants coming here. They don't like immigrants. And what they want to do is they want to strip them of any and all rights. And here, Justice Breyer was warning us. He continues in his dissent, that is because we cannot interpret the words of this specific statute without also considering basic promises that America's legal system has long made to all persons. All persons. In deciphering the intent of the Congress that wrote this statute, we must decide, in the face of what is, at worst, linguistic ambiguity, whether Congress intended that persons who have long since paid their debt to society would be deprived of their liberty for months or years without the possibility of bail. We cannot decide that question without bearing in mind basic American legal values. The government's duty not to deprive any person of liberty without due process of law. The nation's original commitment to protect the unalienable right to liberty, and less abstractly and more directly, the long-standing right of virtually all persons to receive a bail hearing. Note how it keeps saying all persons and not citizens. He ends by saying, quote, I would have thought that Congress meant to adhere to these values and did not intend to allow the government to apprehend persons years after their release from prison and hold them indefinitely without a bail hearing. Well, you know what? I wouldn't have either. But Donald Trump and the Republican majority in the court don't agree. They don't care. Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and the rest of the conservative justices voted of course, in favor of indefinite detention because they do not believe in the freedom for non-citizens living in this country. Even if you've served your time and you get out, they don't care. They will rearrest you. They will throw you in prison while you await deportation. Even if it's not a violent crime, that is not justice. And even as I said, right, for a nonviolent offense, we're going to lock people up for sometimes months and years. That is horrendous, and that is un-American. I thought this was the land of the free. You know, a place that is supposed to welcome immigrants. But I guess now we only welcome people from other countries into prisons operated for profit. It's gross. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation, set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent, progressive media.